All right. You ready?
Ready.
Okay, 3, 2. Hello, everybody. My name is Phil, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Netflix and Phil. Today, I have a special guest. I'm going to read playfully the intro that I have for my current guest. Gary is the founder of Breakthrough Play. He's a corporate facilitator, keynote speaker, certified coach, and creative catalyst. He has over 15 years of experience in the corporate world leading teams. You were also named the top 100 HR leaders in 2021 by Engadgetly. Also the author of Playful Rebellion, which I just listened to the audiobook version of it. You have a career in VO at your disposal if you want it.
Ah,
I thoroughly enjoyed it. And your superpower is your ability to assist others in unlocking their creativity, confidence, and helping them ease into better communication through the power of play to mimic what you did earlier. Welcome, Gary Ware, everybody. Yay.
yay. Thank you. Can I just put you in my pocket and take you to all my events and have you do my intros?
I met Gary several years ago because I think you still continue to teach and perform at Finest City Improv in San
Yep.
Diego. So several years ago, we had met because I have family there. Testing material from my one-man show, Philoween. And I came and down there and played with you guys at the time, and that's when we met, and we've kind of kept in touch, albeit virtually via the net, if you will. But thank you so much for coming on with me today.
My pleasure. I'm so excited just to have a chat.
Well, you're very kind, and sorry it took me so long to connect with you. But as I mentioned, I've been following you online and what you've been doing. And speaking of creative catalysts, in listening to your book, I found out that I think a lot of where you are now stems from what we all went through with the recent global pandemic. So, to kick us off, talk to me about your past, your origins, or how you have evolved as a facilitator, keynote speaker since that time.
Yes. So, uh, currently, I am improv teacher, a facilitator, all these things. That is, I wish that when I was younger, I'm like, yes, mom, dad, I want to do all these things. No, that is not what I set out to do, as most people did. My background is in marketing and communications. That's actually what I went to school for. Uh, I didn't step onto a theater stage until I was in my mid 20s. And it's interesting because the reason why I did that was to actually further my professional development. Because a mentor of mine said, hey, Gary, you could be a better public speaker if you take an improv class. And I looked at him like he was crazy. And I was like, oh, what are you talking about? Because I took Toastmasters and it drove me bananas. Matter of fact, I hated Toastmasters.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that made me even more anxious because they were judging me and I just hated it. And he said, I think that's your jam. And so I took an improv class and I loved it. It was the thing that brought me so much joy because we were goofing around, we were playing, we were doing all these things. And it became my Monday morning thing that it was so much fun. And matter of fact, I started bringing all these games back to my team and I became the play guy. I became the guy that was bringing joy to my team. And then I was hooked. I was taking classes anywhere and everywhere. And yes, we met in San Diego. And at the time, when I took my first improv class, there was only one place that you could take improv classes. And that was at a small theater called National Comedy Theater. And then it just became part of like my sort of my hobby. But then as someone that has ADHD, became also my livelihood because then I incorporated it into my work. And so fast forward like another 15 years after a failed business venture, I found myself needing something to do. And then I said, well, actually, it was actually my partner. She said, this thing that you were doing with facilitation and whatnot, couldn't you get companies to pay you to do that? You were actually doing it for free. I'm pretty sure you could get a company to pay you to do that. And so this was in 2018. So this is
Yes.
pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And I went around, and so this was after I started a marketing agency with some people that I thought I knew, like, and trusted, and it was after that folded, and I reached out to my network and I said, "Hey, look, I'm going to start a team building company," and I reached out and I started testing this, and I gave myself 2 years. I said, "All right, if this doesn't work in 2 years, yeah, I'll go find another day job." Again, at this point, I had built a career as someone in marketing, and I'm pretty sure I can go find another day job. Well, guess what? 2 years after that was 2020.
So 2020 hits, and so I guess the question I have for you is, how does your book Playful Rebellion factor into all of this?
Yes.
When was that born, I guess is my next question.
As I mentioned, I said 2 years.
Yeah.
I thought, as did a lot of people, thought 2020 is going to be my year, where I was starting to figure it out
Yeah.
because I was, yes, a lot of the stuff that I was doing was grounded in improv thinking. It
Mhm.
was grounded in what we both know as applied improvisation, using improv
Yes.
skills outside of the stage. It was Everything was in person.
Mhm.
And I was like, all right, if I can go to conferences and I can show people what I do, clearly they're going to be like, yes, we need to bring that guy to our company. And so I got booked for a number of conferences, and I knew how this was going to work. Well, January of 2020 was great. February of 2020 was amazing. Me and my wife, we got to go on the best vacation ever. We were in Melbourne, Australia, doing this gig at this conference called Pause Fest. And my youngest was just about to be 3 at the time. I doing improv and whatnot. We were so naive of this thing called the global pandemic, and then we come back, and then come March, and I was like, I think we're going to be okay, right? This is just going to be a short term thing.
Yeah.
And it was just quickly, everything was, all of my bookings were gone. And as a way to just, for myself, to just have sanity, what I ended up doing was, taking the skills of improv, of yes and. I was like, you know what? How can I figure out how to make this work in a virtual space, and how can I help? And so I started doing this virtually. And this is how the book came to be. Was I did this challenge where I did this 30-day play challenge where I said, you know what? Adults need play, and we need to do things a little bit differently. So I did this 30-day play challenge where I helped adults, rediscover play, and I did it through a video. I found this platform that was a gamified platform where every day they got a text from me with a play prompt, and we did all these things, and it was so much fun. I had over, I think, 250 people sign up for this challenge. It was great, and it was so much fun, where every day there was a different challenge, and there was these prompts that were like my sort of rebellious things that would help us sort of break the mold of things that kept us stuck in our sort of day-to-day status quo of why adults don't play. And it was a lot of fun. And then afterwards, the 30-day challenge was over. I felt really great, and I felt like, all right, I'm doing something that was helping people, uh, you know, not think about this global pandemic.
Right.
And then a few folks said, "Hey, Gary, um, now what? Do you have this in a written format?" And I was like,
Yes.
"No, it was just video. It took me a lot to do this, and that's it." And then someone else said, uh, "What do we do now?" And
Yeah.
so I was like, "All right, I guess I could make this into a book." And so that was the thought that turned into the book.
Well, and you did it, and congratulations, because it's not easy to write a book.
Oh,
And thank you for having the discipline to do it. And it's available on Amazon and called Playful Rebellion. If you don't mind, I'd like to kind of parse through
yes,
what you wrote, and I have several questions,
you
prompts
please.
here because there was a lot that resonated with me when I listened to it. So feel free to share your thoughts around
Yeah.
any of these questions. What the first thing that resonated with me, you talked about helping adults to rediscover play and how it can benefit them in corporate realms. You at one point say uh, in the book, Henry Ford is to blame for the current workplace norms we are in. So tell me what you mean by that.
Yes. So the 40-hour work week, believe
uh
it or not, came from Henry Ford because prior to that, the norms were 6 days a week, 12 hours a day.
Wow.
And for two reasons why Henry Ford said, you know what, it needs to be 5 days a week, 40 hours. And it's because, one, in factories, people were getting hurt because
Oh,
they
okay.
were overworking themselves and that was causing a lot of injuries. And two, Henry wasn't selling cars because
Ah.
people weren't doing leisure. Because if you think about it, you work 6 days a week. The only day off that you had was Sunday. Sunday was church. Who was using cars? No one was using cars. They weren't doing that. And so Henry was the one who was petitioning that, you know what? Guess what? We should have, it should be 40 hours a week, 5 days a week. That should be the norm.
Ah.
And then we all accepted it. And guess what? We all got raises because we were paid exactly the same. But the problem is how it currently is, especially with technology, we we still have that same norm, but like we overwork ourselves. I don't know about you, but because of these smartphones that are in our pocket, we still have that same expectation, but we work way more than that. We're tied to our devices, and because of these norms, we don't we don't play. The problem, like because of how things were before, people had leisure time.
Right.
One person that I really admire, and he has amazing work ethic, is my grandpa. And he, again, worked very hard. When the day was over, he was done. You know, clock out. He would go home, and he bowled. He spent time with family. He didn't think about work.
This is like mind blowing to me, and I appreciate how you address this cultural shift toward how accessible we are due to technology. And even though we still adhere to the 40 hour work week, the reality is that doesn't really exist because we are so accessible due to the modern technology we use on the daily. So work, we can be at a park and we'll get an emergency text regarding work, any day, anytime. And I think as adults, we're wired to want to respond to it, and it's very hard for us to focus on play, as you specify. So, thank you for walking me through that and reminding us why play can be beneficial. So, with that said, I'm going to jump ahead to the next question. You have done talks, and speaking of play, you often dress up.
I do.
So, when you're speaking in, say, a keynote speech, etc., what do you dress up as, and how does that play into your message?
I and maybe this is I have no problem with a good theme.
Love it.
And aligning that theme to a message. I've dressed up as an astronaut. I've dressed up as a Jedi. You name it. If it makes sense. Again, as an improviser, we're all about push the story forward. And hey, I'm not going to dress up just to dress up, but if it makes sense, I have no problem dressing up. So if you're listening to this and you're scared that I'm just going to just show up in costume, don't be scared. I will let you know in advance if I'm going to dress up. But what you may be thinking of, you may have seen a video of me, Phil, as a Jedi,
Yes.
and I was at a conference called the World Domination Summit, and that was one of my favorite conferences that I used to go to. And that conference is on the principles of how do you live a remarkable life in a conventional world.
Hmm.
and the organizer, Chris Gillibo, we were talking about my my talk that I was going to do, and that was the talk where I was debuting my book, and they love doing things very unconventional, as the theme of the conference was,
Great.
and that that talk, I love that talk so much because we were talking about, since my book is all about, hey, how can we do things in talking about the status quo of work and shifting that up? What better way than the Jedi? And how could I dress up like a Jedi? I love Star Wars and stuff like that. And Chris was like, "Yeah, if you can pull this off, let's do it." And so they had the the ability to do that. I had a video person. I had people dress up like so. We went all out with that, and so I'm all for that. And I had another event where I was the MC, and the theme was out of this world, and I was like, "Could I be an astronaut?" And they were like, "Would you?" And I was like, "Oh, for sure." And they made it happen. So
Why not? I agree with you. I think sometimes in corporate realms and work normalcy, we're so tied to a certain aesthetic or how we should appear, and I think we're kind of too reserved. And I love your leaning into this playful approach, and when you're speaking, having on a costume that's resplendent of the Jedi in Star Wars or an astronaut. So I thank you for that. So not only have you spoken at events much as you described, but you lead and facilitate workshops. So I'm going to dive into a few things that you do within these groups. You talk about recess. What does a recess event look like? Because when I think of recess, I remember back to my childhood days where generously they gave us breaks when we were in school to go out and play and have fun. What does recess look like in your world currently, Gary?
yeah. Well, so I'm gonna start with this. The point of recess when we were in school was to reset our bodies so that when we came back to work at school, we had the dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins so that we can focus.
Right.
But as adults, we forget that we have the same neural systems that we have as a kid. We need that reset. But I like to say adults are kids who just atrophied. And so recess, recess that I do is just elevated. It's just the same stuff that we did as a kid, but just as an elevated format. Yes, we're not going to necessarily just play dodgeball and foursquare, but we're going to play activities that are inspired by things that we did as a kid, but just have an elevated impact. And maybe we might think about what are we doing here that and how is it going to impact our work. So I've done so many different activities that have like a different sort of slant to it. So, for example, I did a painting activity. And a lot of times adults have this thing when it comes to painting where in art in general, where it's like, oh, I know I'm scared of art. I'm not creative. And I totally get it. I totally get it. Sometimes I don't think I'm artistic or whatever. And so this recess that I did where everyone came in and it was themed as a painting thing, and they thought that they thought, to be honest, I think they thought it was going to be a paint and sip sort of thing.
Sure.
Well, it had a different slant to it where they got these slips of paper and they started painting based on the inspiration that they got, and then halfway through they had to switch with someone, and then they had to mess up the person's art.
Oh
They were
no!
instructed to mess up the person's art. And then little did they know that was the one that they got to keep. So it was all about how did they feel when they were instructed to mess up the person's art. And then they created, it was all about collaboration. And then it was all about mashups and stuff like that. It was like really cool. And then we talked about how did it feel when you didn't have any constraints and stuff like that. So I take some different approaches when it comes to recess, but there are different themes. Some are physical, some are mental. The whole point is to allow us to be playful, as allow us to come together in community, and more importantly, have joy, and not think about our day to day, so that when we go back to our day to day, we are filled with the things that are going to allow us to be energized, so that we can get back to the work.
I love this. Thank you for sharing it. And I love the intentionality behind this exercise of painting and then discussing feelings or accepting the input of another painter, which is a huge premise of improv. You know, we have to be accepting of others' ideas or input, even if it might feel a little uncomfortable for us at the time. So I love you're transposing that idea into this recess exercise, which is huge. Speaking of recess, you also talk about the importance of us as adults taking breaks. You mentioned or named different types of breaks, and I want you to help describe it for me. You
Yes,
call them macro breaks, micro breaks, and meso breaks. What are
yes.
they, and how can I now, after I've heard this podcast, employ them?
Micro breaks are the things that we probably need to think about the most. I'll start with macro. Macro is our the big breaks. That is making sure that we get enough sleep. Every day. And when it comes to enough sleep, yes, everyone says 8 hours a day. You get enough sleep for what works for you. I have two kids. I wish I can get 8 hours of sleep. That is not in the cards for me right now, and I'm cool with that. And for some folks who do get 8 hours of sleep, are you really getting 8 hours of restful sleep?
Yeah.
Or are you getting 8 hours of sleep, but right before your head hits the pillow, you have a bright screen in your face, and then so I'm not at a place to judge, but macro sleep is the big sleep. You know, you do what is best for you. Micro breaks, those are the breaks in between. And that's where we should be thinking about, because most of the time we get up, we do our thing, we go straight to work, we work through lunch. We barely stop. When it's time to stop, we go home, we shove food down our gullet, and then we are like our iPhones. And then
Yeah.
when we are past empty, we pass out, and then we do it all over again. This is where we need to be intentional. And again, because we have conditioned ourselves to not think about breaks as something that is going to refuel us.
Hmm.
um, I like to say that we need to come from a place of rest. Rest is not something that we earn. Rest is something that we deserve. And this is why, like, I wrote the book as a rebellion. We need to rebel against the status quo. It happens with, in the book, I talk about these rebellious actions. And so if you're someone who, have a challenge like doing these micro breaks, just because, again, you know, um, if you've conditioned yourself to, like, oh, I work through lunch just because I respond to all these things. Well, guess what? You can design habits, and systems into your day to day to make this possible. And especially if you think about it like this, in that there is research that supports that when we, as humans, we're bad about thinking about our ability to do stuff. And if
Yeah.
you don't take breaks, you're actually not as productive as you think you are.
Right.
You think you are, but you're not. You will most likely make more mistakes. So I personally, I have it set up in my calendar. Like, again, I'm bad at judging my own ability to do stuff. I can't schedule meetings back to back. My calendar won't let me do that. So there is like buffer time in between meetings. And so I use that buffer time to go do stuff. Like, whether it is, I have Legos like within arm's reach at all times. And I, like, as of right now, you probably, folks listening, you can't see this, but I'm holding up a stack of Legos, and I will tinker with Legos. Or well, the kids are back to school, but I have, a 4-year-old who is a perfect playmate who will make sure that I go do stuff. But build in things that you can do that will allow you to either stretch your mind, stretch your body, stretch your imagination, and do stuff, so that when you sit back down to the work, you're energized. So these are the macro breaks.
Okay.
What are the things that are going to energize you? And that is not just during the day, but also, to cleanse your mind before you start work, and to cleanse your mind after work. Because here's the other thing: I love that we're as a society embracing the work from home culture,
Uh-huh.
but also the work from home culture is making us work even more, and it's not giving our brains that cleansing time
Yeah.
to like separate the the different aspects of our life. So we need the breaks before we start work, so we can separate before work and after work. We need that processing time after work, before we start our other time. So those are the macro breaks.
I appreciate hearing that because I think you allude to it before this shift toward remote work that the work commute helped us to kind of transition from our
Mhm.
work selves to our private or playful selves. And I appreciate your suggesting that when you are taking breaks, do something that fuels you or that is playful, so that you feel even more inspired when you go back to the official work at hand, which I think is amazing.
Yes, and so real quick, can I mention the meso breaks?
Oh
Just
yes,
because,
and you by all means, I apologize. I jumped in there and cut you
yeah,
off.
and it's the thing that we overlook because I feel so bad that people feel so bad about taking actual breaks from their work. And meso breaks is actually stepping away from the work. And us US Americans are so bad at taking our PTO. But
Ah.
that is actually stepping away from your work. And I, and that is actually, taking PTO, pay time off, or whatever it is. And even when people take pay time off, they don't actually step away from their work. They're
Mhm.
tied to their devices. And I know I'm sometimes guilty of this too. And I invite people to be creative with it. If you don't have the ability to actually, I wish I could take a sabbatical. I like wish that I love that people have the ability to like literally like I am not doing any work for whatever, but I say be creative. Like my sister, her daughter does soccer, and
Uh-huh.
so twice a week she actually can unplug from work to watch her daughter do practices. And for me that meso break was improv, when I would go and do improv. So whatever you can do to actually step away from your work for an extended amount of time, it could have been PTO, but something to just unplug from the work.
Thank you for reminding me of that, and I apologize for plowing past that important thing we should take advantage of.